Ever wonder what a $1 meal and a $1,000 meal felt like in the 1970s? Back then, meals were experiences shaped by inflation, convenience foods, and changing family life. From TV dinners to fancy restaurants, every bite told a story. Close your eyes, take a breath. Let's step back in time. You remember the first time you heard someone order a lobster thermidor, don't you? Even the name sounded expensive, like a dish that came with its own velvet curtain. In the early 70s, this was a $1,000 experience in spirit, even when it didn't literally cost $1,000. It was the kind of meal people associated with wealth, travel, and a world bigger than the one you knew. The plate arrived like theater, steam rising, the shell split open, the meat drowned in a brandy-laced cream sauce that smelled warm, sharp, and indulgent. You could almost taste the richness before the fork touched your lips. But behind that aroma was a deeper truth. Lobster itself hadn't always been expensive. Earlier in the century, it was poor man's food. But by the 70s, luxury restaurants had transformed it into a status symbol, a culinary crown that said, "I've made it." And for most families, it existed only in imagination, in magazine photos or the stories adults whispered after anniversary dinners. Today, lobster is still pricey, but you can buy a lobster roll from a food truck and eat it in the car. Back then, you dressed up, you saved up, you treated the moment like it mattered. So here's the question. Did you ever secretly wonder if the people eating dishes like that actually enjoyed the taste, or if they just enjoyed being seen with the plate? Now let's drop straight down the ladder, from extravagance to a single dollar in your pocket. Because for $1 in the 1970s, you could walk into a diner and order something so simple, so ordinary, that you barely even thought of it as a meal. But now, decades later, its memory hangs around your senses like a warm blanket. Grilled cheese with a cup of tomato soup. The bread always toasted unevenly. One corner crisped a little darker, one edge softer from the steam. The cheese was usually American, melty, salty, oozing just slightly over the crust. And the tomato soup? It wasn't artisanal or organic. It was canned, thinned with water, warmed in a small silver pot until it bubbled in thick blips. But the smell filled the diner like comfort itself. Sharp, sweet, familiar. This wasn't a poor man's meal. It was a survival meal, a working-class lunch, a school cafeteria staple, a warm-up after rain, a $1 lifeline that tasted like home because it had to. The context behind it was pure practicality. Inflation was rising, wages weren't, and families stretched every coin. Simpler meals weren't trends, they were necessities. A single dollar had real weight, and you felt it every time you handed it over. Compare that to now. Today, a grilled cheese in a cafe can cost more than an entire grocery run used to. And soup? Now it comes with storyboards, locally sourced, slow-simmered, chef-crafted. Back then, it was just lunch. Let me ask you something. When you picture that meal now, do you remember the taste or the feeling of being warm and cared for, even if you didn't recognize it at the time? Let's step back into the world of decadence again, the kind that turned heads and sparked conversations. Because if you wanted to impress someone in the 70s, you took them for Chateaubriand for two. Even the way it arrived felt ceremonial. A thick, tender center cut of beef carved right at the table by a waiter in a crisp white jacket. You'd hear the sizzling fat, smell the buttery béarnaise drifting across the room, and feel that quiet weight in your stomach. The weight that said, "This is expensive, this is special, this moment won't happen often." In context, Chateaubriand wasn't just a meal. It represented old-school European luxury in a decade, trying desperately to look modern. Restaurants offered it as a romantic centerpiece, a showpiece of skill and affluence at a time when fine dining still had rules. Linen tablecloths, hushed voices, flickering candles. But look at today's world. Steak is everywhere now. Fast casual chains, grocery store meal kits, backyard grills, and the pageantry? Nearly extinct. People scroll on their phones between bites. Nobody pauses to watch their meal being carved. So here's the real question. Do you miss the food itself, or do you miss the feeling of being part of a moment that demanded your attention? But if you only had $1 and the kind of hunger that follows long days, you turned not to luxury, but to survival disguised as simplicity. The classic 1970s cheeseburger. Not the towering gourmet, double-stacked spectacles of today. Just a small patty, a slice of bright yellow cheese, a smear of ketchup, a pickle or two, and a soft bun that squished in your hands. The smell hit first, smoky, salty, unmistakably greasy. The wrapper warmed your palms. The bite was quick, familiar, and satisfying in a way modern fast food can't quite replicate. Partly because in the 70s, burgers were cooked on grills seasoned by repetition, thousands of patties shaping the flavor. Partly because the meat itself tasted different, before additives and mass production took center stage. Contextually, fast food was exploding. McDonald's, Burger Chef, and Wendy's were changing the rhythm of American eating. A $1 burger wasn't just convenience, it was the future marching onto your plate. And now, burgers can cost $15. They come with aioli and brioche buns and truffle oil you never asked for. But be honest, if someone handed you that simple 1970s cheeseburger today, wrapped in thin paper and warm with nostalgia, would you take the bite slow this time? You remember how the 1970s had a second tier of luxury meals that weren't just expensive. They were performances, and few dishes captured that feeling like tableside Bananas Foster. It wasn't technically a $1,000 dish, but emotionally, it lived in that world because it made you feel like the room was watching you. The moment the waiter wheeled that small cart over, you felt anticipation ripple through your chest, butter melting in the pan, sugar caramelizing into a golden swirl, bananas softening in that thick, fragrant glaze, everything leading to the moment of fire. When the liquor hit the pan and the flames shot up in a bright blue flare, you could feel the heat brush your face. People around you paused mid-sentence. It wasn't about dessert anymore. It was about spectacle, a performance stitched into your memory through light, heat, and scent. Contextually, American restaurants in the 1970s were embracing flambe culture. Part showmanship, part sophistication, part gentle bragging rights. A sign that you were the kind of person who ordered something that didn't just arrive. It happened. Today, most restaurants wouldn't dare light a match near your table. Regulations, minimalism, speed, everything shrunk the show. But let me ask, do you remember the flavor? Or the moment flame turned dessert into magic? Now swing the pendulum back, because on the other side of the decade, you had a single dollar that could stretch inside a supermarket in ways that feel impossible now. And nothing symbolizes that better than the old Campbell's chicken noodle soup that sat in almost everyone's pantry. The can felt heavier back then. The metallic clink echoed when you tapped it on the counter, and when you peeled back the lid with that sharp-edged opener, because Pop-Tops weren't everywhere yet, the smell of concentrated broth rose instantly. Salt, chicken fat, dried herbs. When it hit the pot, it didn't just warm. It performed its own small transformation. The noodles softened, the broth shifted from dull to shimmering, and whether or not the bowl fixed your cold, it somehow fixed your mood. Context mattered. The 70s were the rise of convenience foods, the peak of canned reliability. Families leaned on meals that lasted, stacked, and stayed affordable. Today, soup brands try to sell comfort as a luxury. Glass jars, organic celery, bougie promises on labels. But be honest with yourself. Did anything ever taste as comforting as that first spoonful from the chipped bowl in your childhood kitchen? Still, no luxury meal in the 1970s embodied wealth the way caviar service did. And you remember how strange it tasted the first time, don't you? Tiny, cold orbs that popped between your teeth. The flavor salty, briny, almost oceanic in a way you weren't sure you liked. But the moment itself, you felt it in your shoulders, the stiffness, the awareness, the quiet thought. I'm eating something rare. I'm eating something expensive. The setup was as important as the taste. Crushed ice, mother-of-pearl spoon, blinis or toast points, maybe a dollop of sour cream, soft lighting, soft voices. The luxury wasn't the caviar, it was the ritual wrapped around it. Contextually, this was peak continental dining, the era when American wealth mimicked European style, when price signaled sophistication, when exclusivity mattered. And now, caviar can be bought online, shipped, unboxed in your pajamas. The ritual has evaporated. So here's a question only someone who lived through that time can answer. Did caviar ever taste good to you? Or did it taste like a secret code you were supposed to pretend you understood? Flip back to the $1 side. One of the purest cheap meals of the 70s, one that almost every family depended on, was boxed macaroni and cheese. And the moment you opened that cardboard box, you already knew the steps like muscle memory, the crinkle of the pasta bag, the tiny cloud of cheese powder that puffed into the air when the packet tore, a smell that was equal parts artificial and comforting. You boiled the noodles until they were just soft, drained them in a colander that always hissed with steam. Then came the magic step, butter melting into the pot, milk turning the powder into that glossy neon orange sauce. It clung to the macaroni like glue, warm, thick, familiar. Why was it a dollar meal? Because it was engineered to be. The 70s were the decade of budget-friendly factory food, where taste came second to affordability. And yet, somehow, this dish dug deeper into childhood memory than any fancy restaurant ever could. Modern versions are 3 cheese, aged cheddar, artisanal, but none of that touches the taste you remember. Not because of the flavor, but because of who was in the kitchen with you when you ate it. Here's the question. Do you remember the meal, or do you remember the person standing beside you while you stirred the pot? Let's let's drift back to extravagance. Because if you ever sat in a high-end restaurant in the late 70s, you probably heard someone send their voice low and proud as they ordered duck à l'orange. This was luxury dressed in French sophistication. The duck skin roasted to a deep, glossy brown. The orange sauce sharp and sweet, glistening under the dining room lights. The aroma, a layered blend of citrus oil, caramelized sugar, and the deep, savory scent of slow-cooked meat. It didn't just smell good, it smelled important. Contextually, French cuisine was the gold standard. It was the badge of sophistication, and restaurants clung to it tightly because diners associated French words with prestige. But today, duck à l'orange is practically a relic. The world moved on to fusion menus, minimalist plates, global flavors. The theatrics disappeared. So, tell me honestly, when you think about that dish now, do you actually remember how it tasted? Or do you remember the feeling of being slightly intimidated by the menu? Now let's return to another $1 staple, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, the unofficial lunchroom anthem of childhood. You remember the way the peanut butter dragged across the bread, thick and stubborn, the knife scraping just a little, the jelly spreading smoother, brighter, sweeter. The smell was unmistakable. Roasted peanuts, sugar, the faint yeastiness of soft white bread. This wasn't gourmet, it was survival simplicity. It existed because parents needed something cheap, quick, and guaranteed to be eaten. Its ingredients lasted forever. Its assembly took seconds. But the memory? The memory lasted decades. In the 70s, $1 could buy you a loaf of bread, a jar of jelly, and a jar of peanut butter, enough for several sandwiches. That's why it was a $1 meal. It fed you repeatedly. Today, PB&J is nostalgia food. Adults eat it in secret or hand it to their kids with a quiet smile. It's become less about saving money and more about saving memory. So let me ask you, did your PB&J lean heavier on the peanut butter or the jelly? Back to luxury, because there was one dish that symbolized not just wealth, but worldliness. Beef Wellington. You remember the sound before you remember the flavor, the crunch of that golden puff pastry cracking open. Inside, the filet mignon was tender, rosy, wrapped in mushrooms that had cooked down to an earthy, fragrant paste. It was a dish that demanded time, technique, and money. Restaurants used it to prove themselves. Couples ordered it to celebrate milestones. The smell of pastry, butter, meat, and wine sauce rising together, it created a kind of silence at the table, a moment where everyone paused. Contextually, Beef Wellington represented elite British dining adopted by American steakhouses eager to seem refined. It was the king's meal in a decade hungry for sophistication. Now, you mostly see it on holiday menus or cooking shows. The average diner barely recognizes it. But here's what matters. If someone placed a perfect Wellington in front of you today, would you eat it slowly, savoring each bite? Or would you find yourself missing the dining room where you first tasted it? Let's come back to the simple, the inexpensive, the deeply familiar ramen noodles. Not the trendy bowls of today, but the 10-cent packets stacked like bricks in grocery stores. You remember the crinkle of the plastic, the hard, square block of noodles, the tiny seasoning packet filled with more salt than science should allow. You boiled water in a small pot. You dropped in the noodles and watched them soften and unravel like they were coming back to life. The smell was unmistakable, salty, savory, comforting in a strangely industrial way. Why was it a $1 meal? Because a single dollar could buy 5 packets, sometimes more. It became the unofficial food of students, late workers, anyone stretching money during a decade where wages couldn't keep pace with the cost of living. Today, ramen has grown up. Bone broth, braised pork, organic toppings. But the memory of the cheap version? That's the one that shaped your late nights, your early mornings, your quiet moments alone in the kitchen. So tell me, did you eat ramen with the broth, or did you drain it and eat the noodles dry like a secret snack? You remember how, in the most exclusive restaurants of the 1970s, there was one dish people ordered not because they were hungry, but because they wanted to make a statement. Coquille Saint-Jacques. If you experienced it even once, you can still picture it. The scallops nestled in a pearly white shell, bathed in a creamy wine sauce, topped with breadcrumbs that toasted into a golden crust. The aroma was delicate yet unmistakable. Butter, white wine, the faint sweetness of shellfish rising like a whisper. This was refined luxury. The kind of meal that arrived slowly, deliberately. The kind that forced you to sit upright, to pay attention, to act like you belonged there. For many people, scallops were exotic back then. They represented something beyond everyday life. A taste of Europe, a taste of travel, a taste of sophistication. Contextually, French cuisine dominated American fine dining, and dishes like this were the pinnacle of elegance. Ordering it wasn't just eating, it was participating in a cultural performance. Today, scallops show up everywhere, grilled on toothpicks, tossed into pasta, sold pre-packaged at grocery stores. But the ceremony is gone. So let me ask you, when you think of that dish now, do you remember the flavor? Or do you remember the shell it arrived in? Let's return to that single dollar, the one that could buy a meal that filled your stomach, even if it didn't impress anyone. $1 hot dogs from the street carts and corner stands that defined entire neighborhoods. You remember the sound before anything else, the hiss of the steam cart, the metallic clink of tongs, the snap of the sausage skin when the vendor lifted it out of the water. The bun warmed instantly from the heat, soft and faintly sweet. The mustard? Bright, sharp, acidic. The onions? Soft, almost jammy. The smell? Pure city life. Smoke, steam, and savory meat blending with the air around you. A hot dog wasn't glamorous. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't aspirational, but it was reliable. It was American. It was cheap. Contextually, the 70s were a decade of rising urban food culture. Vendor carts fed workers, students, families, anyone who needed a fast, warm meal for pocket change. A single dollar didn't just buy food, it bought survival. Today, there are gourmet hot dogs with Wagyu beef and caramelized relish, but none of them taste like the one you ate while standing on a street corner, watching traffic blur past. So tell me, were you the mustard type, the ketchup type, or the everything on it type? Now, shift back into the shadows of luxury, where meals weren't just expensive, they were intimidating. Because if you ever found yourself at a high-end French restaurant in the late 70s, you probably remember one dish that felt like the final exam of adulthood: escargot. Even the word carried weight. The server brought out a plate with tiny wells, each one holding a snail bathed in garlic butter so fragrant it practically reached out to you. You remember the sizzle, the shimmering green specks of parsley, the clink of the tiny fork in your hand. And if you were brave enough to try it, the taste surprised you. Tender, earthy, infused with butter, garlic, wine. More about the sauce than the creature inside it. Contextually, escargot represented the height of cosmopolitan dining. It was a test of refinement, a way of saying, I belong here. Now, of course, it's still around, but it doesn't carry the same mystique. People Instagram it. People joke about it. The fear and the thrill are gone. So be honest, did you enjoy escargot, or did you eat it just to prove you could? But if you had a single dollar in your pocket and maybe a long day behind you, there was one meal that could stretch your money further than almost anything else: the 1970s slice of pizza. Not the overloaded artisanal pies you see today, just a wide, thin slice, cheese bubbling under the heat lamps, the crust with a slight char, the sauce tangy and sweet. You remember the grease pooling on top, bright orange, shimmering under the fluorescent lights. The first bite always burned the roof of your mouth just a little, but you didn't care. This slice wasn't fancy. It wasn't modeled after Neapolitan tradition. It was American pizza, made in big pans, sold quickly, eaten quickly. A hot slice, a cold soda, and you were full for hours. Contextually, pizza by the slice exploded in the 70s because it matched the rhythm of the decade. Fast, cheap, filling, predictable. A single dollar could buy you a slice, and sometimes even a drink. Today, pizza has become a gourmet playground. Imported tomatoes, wood-fired crusts, mozzarella flown across oceans. But none of that compares to the experience of folding a hot slice in your hand, grease dripping down your wrist. So tell me, were you someone who folded the slice, or someone who ate it flat? Back to the world of elegance, the kind of world where meals felt like rituals, and the air in the dining room seemed to hum with quiet etiquette. If you ever tasted oysters Rockefeller in the 1970s, you remember the richness of it. The oysters sat nestled on a bed of coarse salt, topped with a buttery green sauce made of spinach, herbs, garlic, and breadcrumbs. When you lifted the shell, you felt the weight of luxury, warm, savory, decadent. The aroma was earthy and oceanic at once, with a layer of warmth that felt like the restaurant dimmed the lights just a little more for you. That bite, soft, salty, rich, tasted like something forbidden, something from far beyond everyday life. Contextually, oysters were symbols of wealth because they required labor, freshness, and presentation. They weren't just food, they were statements. Now, oysters appear everywhere. Bars, brunches, beach shacks. The exclusivity is gone. But think about it. Do you remember the taste? Or do you remember that moment you realized you were eating something adults called sophisticated? Return to the $1 world, where simplicity ruled and satisfaction didn't need theatrics. One of the quiet champions of cheap eating in the 70s was baked potatoes. You could buy one for $1 or even less in cafeterias, diners, and roadside stops. And when it arrived on your plate, split open with steam rising out of the fluffy center, you knew exactly what to do. Butter melted instantly, seeping deep into the cracks. The smell was simple, earthy, warm, comforting. Add a pinch of salt, maybe a spoonful of sour cream, maybe some chives if you felt fancy. This wasn't a meal meant to impress. It was a meal meant to fill you up. A single potato could carry you a long way. And in a decade where soaring prices forced families to become resourceful, simple foods like this became staples. Today, baked potatoes survive mostly in steakhouses or microwave meals. But the memory of the original, hot, steamy, satisfying stays with you. So tell me, did you mash the butter into every corner? Or eat straight from the center first? Return again to luxury, because the 1970s had one meal that practically screamed celebration: prime rib-carved tableside. You remember the cart rolling up, a gleaming stainless steel fortress with a domed lid. When the server lifted it, the aroma hit instantly. Slow-roasted beef, pepper, salt, the deep scent of fat rendered into flavor. The beef was pink in the center, juicy, marbled, sliced in thick, proud slabs. Yorkshire pudding puffed beside it, golden and airy. And the au jus, dark, rich, collected in a silver boat, was poured over the slice like liquid memory. This was luxury intertwined with tradition, the type of meal reserved for anniversaries, promotions, celebrations you never wanted to forget. Contextually, prime rib was the star of old-school steakhouses, temples of American dining where portions were large, rooms were dim, and everything felt ceremonial. Today, prime rib exists, but rarely with the same grandeur. No carts, no carving, no hush of anticipation. So here's the question. When you tasted prime rib back then, did you savor it slowly? Or did you dive in like you'd been waiting your whole life for it? Swing to the other end again, to $1 and a kitchen that smelled like simple living. Because few meals describe 1970s budget life more accurately than fried bologna sandwiches. You remember the sound first, that quick, sharp sizzle when the slice hit the hot pan, the edges curling upward into little cups. The smell, salty, smoky, unmistakable, filled the whole kitchen in seconds. You slapped the browned bologna onto soft bread, maybe added mustard, maybe cheese, maybe nothing at all. It wasn't glamorous, but the taste? It was warm, familiar, deeply satisfying. Contextually, bologna was affordable, durable, and everywhere. Families leaned on it because it delivered calories and comfort without draining the wallet. Today, fried bologna has become a kind of ironic nostalgia food. Chefs elevate it, hipsters rediscover it, but you remember it before it became a trend. So tell me, did you cut the edges to keep it from curling, or did you like the curl? Now drift back into the world of luxury one more time, because there was a meal in the 1970s that didn't just symbolize wealth, it symbolized arrival: duck à l'orange. You remember the scent before anything else, a sharp sweetness, like citrus zest burning in caramel. When the plate landed in front of you, the duck skin gleamed, lacquered, crisp, golden. The orange sauce glistened like a glaze catching candlelight. The first bite snapped under your teeth, the skin crackling, the meat tender with that deep, savory richness only duck can offer. And then came the sweetness, the bright tang of orange cutting through the fat like a perfect contrast you didn't know food could achieve. Contextually, duck à l'orange was one of the crown jewels of French-inspired fine dining, the perceived height of sophistication in an era obsessed with European culinary prestige. Ordering it meant you had taste, or at least wanted people to think you did. It appeared on the menus of the most expensive restaurants, served with ceremony, sometimes even flambéed for dramatic effect. Today, duck exists on farm-to-table menus and fusion restaurants, but it rarely carries the same aura. Now it's part of the culinary landscape. Back then, it felt like a password. So I'll ask you, do you remember the taste of the duck? Or the feeling of holding that heavy menu and choosing something that made you feel a little bit braver than usual? Let's swing back to the $1 world. The world that fed working families and late-night stragglers alike. Because one of the most universal $1 meals of the 70s, across cities, suburbs, and small towns, was chili. A bowl of diner chili cost about $1, and it tasted like exactly what your gut needed on a long day. You remember the smell: warm, peppery, earthy, the steam rising, the faint metallic sound of the spoon tapping the bowl, the thickness of the sauce clinging to the beans and ground beef, dense enough to feel like a full meal even before you took a bite. Diner chili wasn't gourmet, it wasn't artisan, it wasn't pretending to be anything. It was survival food. Protein-rich, filling, cheap to make in large batches, and comforting in ways that transcended class and background. Contextually, chili became a staple because restaurants could stretch the ingredients during economic uncertainty. Food costs rose, budgets tightened, and and meals like chili kept America warm and fed through inflation, layoffs, and the energy crisis. Today, chili comes in endless variations: vegetarian, gourmet, smoked, regional. But none of them replicate that original bowl served in a ceramic dish that burned your hands if you held it too long. So tell me, were you the type who added crackers, or did you eat it straight from the spoon? Now move back into the world of elegance, because in the late 70s, a meal that redefined luxury dining entered the American imagination: beef Wellington. If you ever saw the waiter slice through that golden crust, you still remember the moment. The pastry flaked softly, breaking open like a secret. Inside, the beef, a rosy, tender center, rested under a layer of duxelles, finely chopped. Mushrooms, shallots, herbs, reduced into a savory paste that smelled like the forest floor after rain. The aroma was deep, buttery, earthy, refined. The bite was a revelation: crisp, soft, juicy, rich, all at once. Beef Wellington wasn't just expensive, it was theater. It required technique, patience, ingredients that only wealthy diners could afford. Contextually, British and French culinary traditions collided in fancy restaurants, and Wellington became a showpiece dish. Chefs flaunted it, couples ordered it to mark milestones. It represented ambition on a plate. Today, it's still around, but now you find shortcuts, simplified versions, even frozen versions. The mystique is softer, but be honest. Did you admire the dish because of the taste, or because it felt like the kind of meal people in movies ordered? And now back to that humble dollar, the kind that had to work hard for you. Because another iconic $1 meal of the 1970s, one that fed college students, single parents, night shift workers, and anyone stretching their budget, was ramen noodles. Not the artisanal ramen people line up for today, not the meticulously crafted broth simmered for 12 hours. No, this was the cheap, instant kind that came in a small brick, wrapped in thin plastic. You remember the crinkle of the packaging, the way the noodle block thunked into the pot. The seasoning packet, salty, savory, aggressively concentrated, torn open with your teeth. The smell rose fast. Steam clouded your glasses. The broth was thin but warming, and the noodles, soft and slippery, had an addictive comfort that filled you more than it should have. Contextually, this was one of the earliest waves of instant food culture. Affordable, shelf-stable, quick. It became a quiet companion for anyone managing tight finances or living alone for the first time. Today, ramen has ascended into culinary stardom. But those instant packets, they still sit on shelves, still cost pocket change, still taste like survival and nostalgia mixed together. So tell me, did you eat the noodles plain, or did you doctor them up with an egg, vegetables, or whatever you had on hand? Now, rise back into the realm of decadence, just for a moment longer, because in the 70s, one of the most extravagant dining experiences wasn't just a meal, it was an event. Tableside Caesar salad. You remember the sound before the flavor, the rhythmic scrape of anchovies being mashed into garlic, the whisk tapping the bowl as the dressing emulsified. The server stood with confidence, turning raw ingredients into something that smelled sharp, creamy, salty, and unmistakably fresh. Romaine was tossed with precision. Croutons crackled, Parmesan snowed down in long, fragrant curls. This salad didn't cost $1,000 literally, but symbolically, it was one of those dishes that made you feel rich. You weren't just eating, you were participating in a ritual. Watching food come to life before your eyes made it feel alive when you tasted it. Contextually, tableside service was the hallmark of high-end dining, an era before open kitchens, when part of the luxury was witnessing the craft up close. Now, Caesar salads show up everywhere, from pizza chains to grocery store kits. But none of them have that moment of magic when the dressing was born right in front of you. So tell me, do you remember the salad, or the feeling of watching someone make it just for you? And now, on the opposite end, the $1 end, there's a meal you can still taste just by remembering the wrapper: the 1970s peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Not gourmet bread, not organic peanut butter, not artisanal jam, just the essentials. White bread so soft it compressed under your fingers, peanut butter thick enough to glue your jaw shut, jelly so sweet it felt like eating liquid candy. The smell was unmistakable: roasted peanuts, sugar, and childhood. You remember spreading the peanut butter, the resistance of the knife. You remember the jelly slipping out the sides, the way the bread stuck to the roof of your mouth, the comfort of knowing you could make it in minutes, any time. Contextually, PB&J was the great equalizer: cheap, shelf-stable, hugely calorie-dense. Parents relied on it. Kids devoured it. It fed millions for pennies. Today, PB&J still exists, but it doesn't taste like it did when your world was smaller. So tell me, were you the type who spread peanut butter on both slices? Or did you live dangerously and do peanut butter on one and jelly on the other? Now rise back to luxury for the final time, because there was one dish in the 70s that embodied everything the era dreamed of: wealth, technique, sophistication, and indulgence. Soufflé. You remember the anticipation. You remember the hush that fell over the table when the server approached. The soufflé, tall, delicate, trembling, looked like it could collapse under the weight of your breath. A cloud of chocolate, or cheese, or lemon. Impossibly airy, warm, sweet, or savory depending on the flavor. The aroma drifted first. Chocolate deep and heavy, cheese sharp and creamy, lemon bright and sharp. The spoon cracked the top, releasing steam that carried decades of memory with it. The texture melted on your tongue like warm air turning into flavor. Contextually, soufflés were considered the ultimate test of skill. High risk, high reward. A dish that separated fine dining from everything else, and ordering it made you part of that moment. Today, soufflés still exist, but the mystique isn't the same. The tension is gone. The drama is gone. So tell me, do you remember the taste or the suspense? And now, back to where so many of your days actually ended, in the world of the $1 meal. The world that carried you through childhood, early adulthood, and moments of quiet survival. Cereal. A bowl of cereal cost about $1, and you remember how it felt to pour it. The sound of the flakes or loops or puffs hitting the bowl, the cold milk cascading over them, the smell, grainy, sweet, familiar, the first spoonful crunchy, the last spoonful soggy. Contextually, cereal became the backbone of American eating in the 70s. Simple, cheap, filling, endlessly marketed to children and adults alike. It was breakfast, it was dinner, sometimes it was everything. Today, cereal aisles are overwhelming. Prices climb, brands evolve, but the nostalgia untouched. So let me ask you one last time, when you think of a $1 meal, do you think of cereal because of the flavor or because of the freedom it gave you when you didn't have much else? And now we've walked through the world of the 1970s as you once lived it. $1,000 dish at a time, one $1 lifeline at a time. Two realities at opposite ends of a decade that shaped the way America ate and how you remember food today. Luxury meals that dazzled you, survival meals that sustained you, dishes you tasted once and dishes you tasted 1,000 times. But in the end, the question isn't just what the meals cost, it's what they meant to you. If this journey stirred even one memory, one taste, one smell you forgot you remembered, then tell me in the comments. Which meal, luxury or simple, defined the 1970s for you? And if you want more stories like this, more time travel through flavor, memory, childhood, and change, make sure to click one of the cards playing on your screen to watch similar videos.